Good evening and welcome to another episode of Late Night with Lenette. I'm Lenette Peterson, your host. This evening's guest, very special guest for Merrimack and Hillsborough County, the Hillsborough County GOP Chairman, Mark Vincent. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks, Lenette. Great to be here.
It's always good to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise.
So the big cheese now, the chairman of the Hillsborough GOP.
Chairman of the Hillsborough County Republican Committee,
Yeah.
Yes.
How did you get involved with the Hillsborough County Republican Party?
Well, let me step back from my involvement in the county committee. I started out active in my own town committee in Amherst first, and I'm still the town chair in Amherst as well. So I didn't give up that job when I ran for county chairman. So one can question the wisdom of that decision, but I didn't. And so I first got involved at the local level in my town committee not long after I moved to Amherst, about a dozen years ago. And at some point, we had members there who were active with the county. They invited me to a county meeting, so I began attending county meetings, and I was elected treasurer in the previous term, and then chairman for this term. So
Now, you were also vice chair at one point.
no, I was never
Weren't you?
vice chair.
You weren't vice chair? I
No.
thought you were vice chair.
No, Fred Plett was our longtime
Okay, yeah.
vice chair for the county, and he decided not to run again because he has a lot of other things going on. And Ray Chadwick, our prior chairman, did a great job, served 2 terms. He decided he wanted to spend some time on other things, other areas of activism. So he did not want to run for chairman again, and asked me if I would be interested, and decided to give it a try.
Very good. And you served under him those 2 terms.
Yes,
So you had a great mentor.
absolutely. I learned a lot from Ray.
I bet. Now, what does the chair actually do?
Well, the chair is obviously in charge of procuring the guest speakers and calling the meetings, and overseeing the affairs of the committee. It's not all that different from being a town chairman. You have to drive the success of the committee along with your executive committee or your core team. But what we have found, certainly at the town level, and it's no less true at the county level, is you've got to have a chairman who is engaged and interested and can drive the success of the committee and bring other people along, because you have to have a team effort. It's never just one person. It's always a good team. So and the county committee has the responsibility, as do the town committees or any level of the Republican Party, get Republicans elected.
There you go.
That's
Yeah.
what we're about.
Yep. Now, what's the biggest challenge of being the chairman? Or is there a challenge to being the chairman?
There are many challenges.
What do you think is the biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge, at least recently, the biggest challenge has been keeping enough people engaged in the process. We always say, within Republican circles, that we have 2 main opponents: Democrats and apathy.
Right.
And sometimes it's not clear which one is the bigger problem for us.
Right.
So, what we're trying to do, and at the county level, we're trying to keep active town committees in all of our towns in the county. Make sure that we have chairmen who are engaged, as I described before, to keep things moving. They can gather that core team and really be our eyes and ears on the ground in all of the various towns, because, what we know and what other county chairs that I talked to have found out is trying to run everything from the county level. It's like if we were to try and run all of our grassroots operations from the state party headquarters, it's not going to work too well.
No.
And it doesn't work very well at the county level either. We like local control in New Hampshire. We like local
Right.
control of our towns and our schools, and that certainly applies to our Republican committees. So at the county level, what we're trying to do is coordinate those activities, make sure that all of our town committees are active, do some fundraising, do some organizing, and also fulfill our duties under the bylaws of the state committee.
Now, you said you'd like to get a committee in each town. What about a town like Peterborough, where
We have a town committee in Peterborough.
Now, how does that work when you're as a Republican, you were grossly outnumbered?
Well, it's a different dynamic. It takes a different technique. But as I tell all of our town committees, it's really not so much about being the most Republican town, but making sure that whatever Republican voters you have in the town, both registered Republicans and undeclared voters, who are often with us, even though they're not registered Republicans, making sure that you get everybody in that town out to vote. As long as you have a great get out the vote effort, we're going to win elections. We just need all of the Republicans who are in Peterborough to go out and vote for our candidates. Same thing for any of the more Democrat towns in the county. Fortunately, we don't have too many of them, but we do have an active committee in Peterborough, and you're operating in more hostile territory. It's not like running a town committee here in Merrimack or in my town of Amherst, where we are the majority. These are Republican towns. But we also have to make sure that we maximize our vote. We can't take anything for granted. We can't sit back and say, well, Merrimack is a Republican town, so we don't have to be as organized. We don't have to work as hard. We know that we still have to work very hard in all of our towns to make sure that the voters see that we have active committees, that we have good candidates, that we are promoting a platform that they agree with, and making sure that they can be confident that when they go to the polls, that voting Republican is going to give them good government, efficient government that respects everybody's constitutional rights.
There you go. Yeah, getting Republicans out to vote. Merrimack's town election, I mean, we don't vote town meeting day like most of the state does. Our last election, last April, 10% of the voters got out to vote. Is it like that just in Merrimack, or in a lot of towns is it voter turnout low?
Voter turnout for town elections does tend to be lower than it is for the state and federal.
Why do you think? Now, I would think all elections are important. I mean, I know all elections are important.
Absolutely.
Why do a lot of people think town elections aren't important? Any idea?
I'm not sure. I would think that you would take even a greater degree of interest in your town elections, because when you go to vote in a town election here in the state of New Hampshire, you are going to vote on your tax bill.
Exactly.
Directly.
It's
not like other states where the majority of the taxes go to the state capital through income taxes, through sales taxes, through other broad-based taxes, and then you have to send people to your state capital to beg, please send us some of our own tax dollars back. When you are voting in a town election, you are determining what the budgets are, you are determining who is crafting those budgets, who's setting policy, and because we have local control in New Hampshire on the town and school side, those elections are critical. So why we only get, and 10% is really low. I mean,
that's deplorable.
My experience in some other towns has been 20, 22%. 10%, especially in a town the size of Merrimack, means that almost nobody is going out to vote, which means that those who don't vote are allowing a very small percentage of people in the town to determine how things are run. You're giving up control to somebody else who may or may not have your best interests at heart. I think that part of the problem is that over the years, and I can't say whether this has always been the case, but I think that what I'm finding is that people tend to really fixate on the top of the ticket at the national level. They tend to focus on national issues and national candidates. Now, we're in a presidential year, so obviously we're going to have a lot of attention to candidates for president. But I talk to people that, Republicans, conservatives, folks that would share
Didn't put it on vibrate in between shows.
There's somebody. I know the show isn't live. Otherwise, I would say there's somebody calling in to complain, or you're taking live audience questions. People that I would expect to be engaged at both the national and state and local level, they don't even pay attention to local news. They're not watching, WMUR or NH1. They're not reading, local newspapers. They don't know what's going on in their own town or cities. They're focusing only on what's going on in Washington, D.C., and what's going on in the horse race for president, or what the Speaker of the United States House is saying, and not paying attention to what the Speaker of the New Hampshire House is saying or doing, or what their own representatives are doing. It doesn't make any sense to me, and what I've tried to do is get people to focus. Don't stop focusing on what's going on nationally, because that has a huge impact on all of our lives, too much impact, if you ask me. But also pay attention to, what are your New Hampshire House members doing, your state senator? What are your selectmen or town councilors up to? What are your school boards working on? And once you get engaged in that, you will go out and vote. You will be one of those people who are out making your voice heard, voting on those budgets and voting on those board members, because it does have a huge impact, not just fiscally speaking, but school committees, for example. They're setting policy. They're setting policies that affect every student in that school system, whether or not you have kids in the schools, or maybe you did, or maybe you will. This is impacting what our cities and towns are going to look like. Not just what level of education the kids are going to have, but what kind of citizens they're going to be when they graduate, what kind of places of higher learning they'll move on to. So there's fiscal and policy issues happening every single day in every one of our towns. And I would certainly encourage everybody, especially here in Merrimack, we're only getting 10% out to vote. What that really does mean is, if even in towns where you'd see 20 or 22%, it really means that your vote means that much more. You know, you really have more power, because unfortunately so many of the citizens they've given it to you. Use it. You know, make your voice heard. You have so many opportunities in this state, more than a lot of other states, to do so.
Exactly. And in our last town election in 2015, Merrimack actually made national news because of our horrible school budget that passed. We only have 3,000 public school students. Our budget was over $72 million.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And
it's unbelievable.
10% went out to vote. And they had their chance to vote it down. Bedford has newer schools, bigger public school population. They score better. They also have better sports. Their budget is less than Merrimack town budget for schools.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pathetic. But people don't get out and vote. And this year, the same people are running for re-election that have been running the school board, and no one challenged them.
That also amazes me, that you have people running unopposed. I mean, the message that is sent, if people are not paying attention, they're not showing up to vote, candidates are unopposed. I mean, look, we've had years in Amherst where we haven't even had enough candidates to fill the ballot, never mind being unopposed. Now, that could be a message being sent that says, hey, things are going well, I'm happy, I'm not upset, this board is good, then, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's perfectly acceptable. You should still go out and vote.
Exactly.
But if there's, you know, a lack of controversy could mean one of two things. Either things are running very well, or people are just not paying attention. And what I have found, because I've been active not just in the Republican Party, but also from a taxpayer advocacy standpoint on local issues, which tend to get a lot less partisan and a lot more just good government efficiency and value for the tax dollar. What happens is, if you have boards of selectmen or school boards that begin to get comfortable with the fact that no one's paying attention, and they're having meetings in empty rooms, and there's nobody there, there's nobody watching, and there's nobody voting, well, they can pretty much do whatever they like. And that tends to, that could lead to some poor practices, to less transparency of government, to higher spending, because there's always going to be somebody who's making their voice heard. There's always going to be somebody who has the ear of that school board member or that selectman, or in the case of Merrimack, a town councilor. If your voice isn't there, and the only voices they're hearing are spend more, expand government, you know, even if they're more conservative types of people, even if they're Republicans, they're going to respond to the voices that they hear, which is why it's so important to let them know what you think, to let them know what your opinions are. Now, your opinions or your advice may go right along with what they've been doing. I don't think it hurts to say, great job. You know, I like what this board is doing. I like what you're doing. Keep up the good work. That's good too, because as long as you have that relationship, so that if things do take a bad turn, if things are not going well, you have that relationship, you have that networking done, you can then show up and say, hey, this what you're proposing here, not so good. Let's take a different path here. And what also tends to happen is, once you become aware of the workings of municipal government, you may want to get involved. You may want to put your name on the ballot. And
Exactly.
that's always something we like to see.
Yep. And I noticed in the town elections, well, most elections, voters tend to be older. There's not as many younger voters. Have you noticed that in Amherst?
Well, New Hampshire in general, I mean, the average age here is fairly high. I mean, we're competing with Florida.
Exactly.
In that respect. So
for
it's
sure.
it's an aging state, and certainly Amherst is no exception to that. However, just this past March, when we had our town elections, I think we saw a change there. I think we
good.
saw a lot more younger people showing up to vote. There was a lot of controversy about school spending, coming back to
There you go.
to what you were mentioning earlier. And in past years, a lot of the focus in Amherst has been on town affairs, because nothing gets people more interested in voting and finding out what's going on than a perceived lack of transparency. Once the citizen gets an idea that maybe there's something not so good going on, then they want to get involved. And controversy and people getting upset about something, that's a motivator to go and vote. So this year, the focus, in the last couple of years, the focus changed from town to school. Now you've got people who are more invested in the schools, wanting to go out and vote. That includes a lot of students. It includes a lot of younger people who, may have kids either in the schools or will be sooner. They're planning on that. So I think the school issues can motivate maybe a younger demographic to come out and vote. I think we saw that. We had almost 35% turnout as a result, which is, that's big.
That is huge.
And we did that, and it was mostly around school issues this time, which does tend to motivate people because that's something that affects so many people in town.
Exactly.
And people who have kids in the schools, they're looking both fiscally and from a policy issue. Those that don't, maybe they're just looking for an opportunity to keep that tax bill under control. Maybe they have a perception there's too much being spent on schools. That's a debate that happens every year, should be happening every year. Have the debate. Are you spending enough? Are you spending too much? Are you spending too little? Is it being used the right way? It really comes down to the value for the dollar. Government spends a lot of money at every level. There are programs that are worthy of those expenditures. There are duplications of programs. There are programs that shouldn't even exist. Let's have the debate, and if we decide that a program or a part of government should operate, let's make sure that the policies are good. Let's make sure that it is operating transparently, that we have full information, and let's make sure that we're getting value for every one of those tax dollars, because every dollar that any level of government spends first has to come out of somebody's pocket. And if you're talking about local elections, they can't spend $1 on the schools or on DPW or on Parks and Rec until they take it out of your property tax bill. And so it's dollar for dollar. Let's get the value. Let's have good government.
Exactly. Folks, your property taxes, school budget. The Merrimack Town Council has done a decent job of keeping the spending down. Merrimack School Board is just off the walls with their spending. In fact, a couple of years, it was just pennies that the town council raised the budget. But the school, off the charts. Folks, you got to get out there and vote. You want to lower property tax, get the school board under control with their spending. And I've noticed in Merrimack, we don't have a lot of young voters. But the last town election, I ran for town council. Came up short, but it was very interesting. Not too many high school or college age.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
it's a concern because when you only have older, I'll say that without defining it so that nobody in the audience gets offended.
There you go.
So you can decide whether you consider yourself older or not. But when you only have older people voting, and you don't have the younger folks showing up at the polls, that tells me that they're not engaged in the process. They may not understand the importance of voting. It also means that they may be less likely to get involved with the workings of government. And I'm talking about town, I'm talking about state, I'm talking about the federal government. And somebody who is maybe a first-time voter today, that's somebody who could be a candidate tomorrow. That's somebody who could be involved at the local level or at the state level or even at the federal level in the future. And if you've got a whole generation who is just detached from the process, again, it comes back to what I said about the Board of Selectmen in that empty room. No one's paying attention. The smaller and smaller group will decide what happens. And the younger you are, the more debt that you will be responsible for. Now, this really comes into play at the federal level. If you are somebody graduating from high school today, I mean, we're closing in on $20 trillion of debt. Look at the share of that debt that every single American has. It's staggering. The U.S. debt clock, there's a website for it you could look up, and you can see the numbers turn of how much every individual owes as a part of that. You're having one generation that is funding programs based and giving IOUs to the next generation, and it's darn close to criminal the way that's happening. If I was the one, I mean, I am I'm a taxpayer, I'm a citizen. I don't really appreciate that. I don't really appreciate that because, again, at the local level, it's easier to do this, but even at the federal level, all of the spending, all of the debt, what are we getting for those dollars? How is that improving my town, my school, the life for my kids? Is that going to result in a better or worse job prospects? When my kids get out of school, is that going to result in a more or less prosperous nation? We've all seen the statistics that we're coming to a point where people believe that the next generation is not going to inherit as strong a country as we have today and as we have seen. And I think it does come back to that demographic you are seeing at the polls. Those are people, by and large, who have lived long enough to know a much stronger nation, a nation with a lot less debt, with a lot less spending, with a value system that was a lot different. So they may be going to vote to preserve that. They may be going to vote because they've always felt that was their civic duty. If we're not passing that on to the next generation, this country is going to be in big trouble.
Exactly. And some people say, "Oh, my vote doesn't even count." Every vote counts at every election. And this is when 18-year-olds can go off to war. I mean, that's a given. You should be able to control what's done in your town. Your vote counts here in any election as soon as you turn 18. Now, you still at home, your vote doesn't count. I mean, you still have to follow your parents' rules. You have to, if your parent says, "I know your curfew's at 11 o'clock," even if you're 18, but your vote counts just as much as your parents' vote counts.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
It really is the one time where you own. I mean, let's think of it in investment terms.
Yep.
You're a stakeholder, a shareholder in your country and in your state and in your town. That's the way I looked at it. That's why I didn't buy a home in another state, bought a home here in New Hampshire, because this is the state I wanted to own shares in. This is the state I wanted to be an investor in. I thought, much like any investor does, that my return on that investment was going to be better. This is the place that I wanted to own a piece of. And as a stakeholder, you have a share of the responsibility just as a shareholder in any publicly traded corporation. And you have your votes in both cases. You're casting a vote on the board of directors, selectmen, school board, state reps, on certain policies when they come to the ballot. You're a stakeholder, and you need to look at it that way. And as soon as you're 18, you're really a stakeholder before that, but at 18 you get the vote.
Right, exactly.
And you should be making use of it, but also, a company has to be run in a forward-looking way. You can't always do what's best for the next quarterly report. You should be now some companies do operate that way, but you should be looking forward. What's your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, even 10-year plan? How does what I do today affect what my company is going to look like tomorrow? You can take the same approach to voting. You can take the same approach to civic involvement, and I really wish that more people would.
Oh, exactly. My oldest daughter, I mean, both my daughters registered to vote when they were 18 years old. My oldest was, I believe, 22. She put her name on the ballot for a delegate.
Great opportunity. To
Exactly.
get on the ballot.
I mean, you only meet twice,
Yep.
but we made, I think, 20 signs with her and my name on, because we both ran for delegate. But that got her a taste of what it's like to, we didn't have to do any campaigning, but we stood at the polls with our sign. Not too many delegates do, but she wanted to make sure she got in. And when she put her name on the ballot, she said, okay, when do we start campaigning? What do we do? So her and I were at the polls all day that day. She got elected. And as a 22-year-old, she beat out a lot of adults.
That is terrific. I mean, I love to hear that. I love to hear that, one, because it, for any young person to get involved that early. Of course, we have some very young people, currently holding seats.
Oh, yes.
in the New Hampshire House, and which is always great to see, because you get a different perspective, different outlook, and young people taking, recognizing that they're stakeholders, getting on the ballot, taking an active role. But even for a delegate spot, where you're right, it's 2 days of responsibility.
Right.
It's a great way to get involved. You get a lot of the similar, campaigning dynamic. And hey, what's better than winning an election?
Exactly.
Everybody likes
And what
to
was
win.
really cool, an older Republican, not older, but older than my daughter, spoke out and said, I speak for young Republicans. My daughter stood up and challenged her because she didn't speak for my daughter. My daughter had a completely different idea and beliefs than this one person, and stood up and said, no, you don't speak for young Republicans. I'm one, and this is my opinion. Well, we are at the end of the show.
We are already?
Already. It goes by so quick.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really
Thank you
does.
so much for being on the show.
Hey, it was my
Very
pleasure.
interesting. It's always good talking with you. Good luck with the upcoming primary.
Yeah, well, it's been pretty exciting so far, and it will continue to be right up until the convention.
Very good. Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Late Night with Lenette. Good night, and God bless.